available to everybody at a later date. As you see, it's just clicked up there now. And lost my way. And also for anybody who wants to ask a question throughout the presentation, please use the chat rather than being actively speaking on the line, and I will pick up those questions as we go through the session and add in a few others that we have in the background. If the question is more broader and relevant to a panel question rather than to the individual speaker, I'll hold it to the end. So don't think I'm ignoring you if you're going on from this. So we're looking at this from three specific angles. The question of imported soya use in the UK agriculture industry. We know that soya beans are grown, and we know that there are two products for bean growth. There is a massive demand for soybean oil within processed food, within paint, within biodiesel, particularly in America at the moment, and there's a byproduct. But we also know there's a big demand for that byproduct. So some people will argue that we use soya and it's grown to feed our cattle and our sheep and our pigs and our chickens. And some people will argue it's a byproduct. Which side of the argument? It depends on where you sit in that debate. But it's a really fascinating question, and I want to drill down into that a little bit here. So three speakers I got today. I'll introduce going to Rob Dakin from the Dakins. Rob is well known in the agricultural industry from his time working as an agriculture nutritionist. Sam Lee Gamage comes from the Waitrose to John Lewis partnership and has much more experience on sustainability. And then Mike Mallet, known to some of you, is an organic poultry and arable farmer from Saxmundham in Suffolk, who has developed a farming system that is becoming independent of the imported products, using locally produced food, and he's going to talk through his system and explain it. So we get a farmer view of the way that we can actually achieve this as and make sure it demonstrates that it is possible to actually replace the imported soya. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Rob Dakin, to introduce himself properly and talk through his presentation. So Rob.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm just going to try and address and look at the question set. Replacing imported soya, is it a supply chain, is it a farmer issue, or is it really a little bit deeper than that and a little bit more needs looking at? So what I'm going to try and work through, a little bit of background, a brief description, what the options are, where we can make them fit. The numbers, I think the numbers, the stats and the figures are really important to us, and I want to drill into those a little bit deeper. Try and sum it up in a conclusion, and then any questions. So if we look at the background, over the last sort of few months, I've listened to, been part of several meetings, discussions, webinars, concerning soya and its sustainability credentials. And the interesting point for me is that we're probably looking at soya today the way we looked at palm 10 years ago. And if we look how far palm has come with its supply chains and its sustainability, soya is probably in the same area today. And I've listened to companies such as Tesco's, Cranswick, Ferrero, Carrefour in France, explaining their reasons for committing to the UK Soya Manifesto, and they are by no means on their own. You've got AIC, you've got the British Egg Industry Council, British Poultry Council, Pig Association, all signing up to the Soya Manifesto. And I think the biggest issue in conventional is probably deforestation. And for the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to try and focus mainly on organic. And one issue that fortunately we don't have with organic is deforestation due to the origins. So today I'm going to try and answer the question, replacing imported soya, is it a supply chain or is it a farmer issue? In an ideal world, I would have all the answers, but it's not, and I don't. What I do know is it's neither one nor the other, but both, with a few complications thrown in there just for good measure. So what are our options? Raw material pool in organic is really small at best, and I do agree wholeheartedly that we should be looking to reduce imported soya. It travels large distances, and it mainly travels via containers. The question always is, what do we use to replace it with? You know, our options, we've got peas and beans, we've got UK oilseeds, we've got clovers, lucerne, high protein forages, really for the ruminants only, but certainly have a place. We've got mid-range proteins, but again, are imported, lucerne and palm kernel. Again, we'll touch on those in a little bit more detail later. We've got insect protein. We've got essential oils. But what I really want to do before we touch on all of those is have a real good look at the numbers. So we've got the big three. You know, if we look at imported proteins, the big three for me are soya. We import roughly 60,000 tons of organic soya. 35,000 of that goes into monogastrics, into pig and poultry. 25,000 goes into the ruminant sector. We import 20,000 tons of organic sunflower expellers, 50-50 split between monogastrics again and ruminants. And we bring in about 5,000 metric tons of rape expeller. That tonnage all ends up in the ruminant sector. And if we look at it in terms of percentages, sunflowers 23%, rape 6%, soya is 71% of our imported proteins. We throw into that mix what we have in terms of UK pulses, that would represent roughly 2% of that pie, reducing soya expeller to 69. I think one thing we need to be clear of and to look at are, you know, where are the countries of origin? You know, if you take 2020's figures, and these, you know, certainly can vary year on year depending on harvest figures, prices, and, you know, and export tariffs, export figures. But if you look at 2020, the biggest percentage of soya came in from India. Over 70% of the soya came in from India. Nearly a quarter of it from China. If we look at sunflowers, roughly a 50-50 split between China and the rest of the world, and the rest of the world really being Eastern Europe. And rape meal is roughly a 50-50 split between China and India. I think what's really important is when we look at replacing soya, we need to look at it on a units of protein basis. So what do we, you know, actually what is the units of protein we need to replace it? So if we take that initial 60,000 tons, we replaced it with sunflowers, we'd need to import 82,500 tons to get the same usable units of protein. If we took rape, we'd be looking 76,000 tons. If we actually looked at the UK pulses, it'd be 121,000 tons on a unit for unit basis. And there is an argument that we should always calculate on this. What does that mean in terms of imports? Well, if we used sunflowers, that's an extra 1,125 containers. If we used rape to replace that 60,000 tons, that's an extra 666 containers. And the really important thing for me is that if we replace soya with rape and suns, you know, they both originate from the same sources. So what is the reason to replace soya with either sunflowers or rape? And what are the downsides of it? You know, we've got to consider the availability. Could we find another 22,500 tons of sunflowers, or another 37.5%? That's the numbers that we're really looking at. Can we find another 22.5% of of rape. We need to look at the quality. Can we get the same quality, the same results from suns, from rape that we can from soya? And we have to look at the feed rates. We have to look how much of individual products that we can squeeze into the diets, whether they're TMRs, whether they're compound feeds, whether they're blends. How do we get the feed rates in there? And the supply chain issues we've touched on, you know, with the extra containers in a shipping world where we are at the moment. So that ultimately impacts the carbon footprint. There will be a report published later this month by Organic Arable detailing carbon footprints, and particularly of imported cereals, and I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing that and what that brings forward and how it can be used across the whole range. I want to touch now a little bit on the UK peas and beans data. In 2020, the DEFRA figure for peas and beans and oilseeds within the UK showed a total of 600 hectares, 1,482 acres. So if we took an annual yield of 2.9 tonnes, which would be a fairly average yield, that would give us a volume of approximately 1,800 tonnes. I'm not quite sure what's happened here, Jerry. There we go, back on track. So that gives a UK yield of about 1,800 metric tonnes. You take home use out of that and seed, that gives us 1,400 metric tonnes available for sale based on the 2020 figures. A tiny percentage if we think back to that original 60,000 tonnes. But if you take the best year I can find in the last sort of 15 is 2011. And there was 2,400 hectares. So if you took the same yield parameters, that gives you a yield of approximately 7,000 metric tonnes. Again, still a long way short of the 60,000 tonnes that we've imported of soya. So how many hectares do we need to grow to replace that soya expeller? Well, if you based it just purely on a tonnage basis, 21,000 hectares. But if you based it on protein, and beans being around that 21 to 24 protein, so 22 as an average, we actually need 42,000 hectares. The total organic arable area for the UK is only circa 40,000 hectares. So, the two numbers are not going to fit into each other. So there's an awful lot of work to do in terms of getting that 2% up to 5%, up to 7%, up to 10%. And those numbers, I need to credit Organic Arable and DEFRA for the figures there. So, we'll just thank Andrew Trump for supplying me with those from Organic Arable. So what are the other options? We have high protein forages for the ruminant sector. So we've got lucernes, we've got clovers, we've got high protein forages. They certainly can aid reduced bloat in protein. And if you work on the mantra, the more milk, more meat you can make from within the farm boundary, it's going to impact the bottom line for sure. But there's always, with everything, there's always limitations, rainfall, area of the UK, acreage available. You're certainly not going to be growing lucerne in certain parts of Cumbria and Scotland. And, again, some other crops will struggle in those areas as well. So we have to take that into account. What are our other options? mid-range proteins, insect protein, essential oils. The mid-range proteins are really interesting. Lucerne, palm kernel. They've all got their own specific characteristics and all fit into diets at some point and and can bring their own benefits over and above just being a protein source. And, you know, particularly palm kernel can be used to improve milk solids at certain times of year. Lucerne can be used to stretch forages as well as a protein source. But they as well as their benefits, they certainly have their limitations in the diets. Insect, that's a really, for me, a really interesting question. Are we there yet? Is it further down the track? I think if all the indicators are to be correct, then it is going to definitely be part of the solution going forward. But how far forward really remains to be seen. You know, are we comfortable with the regulation behind it? Are we comfortable that insect protein is safe? You know, where are we? How far? And I'd be interested to hear what the other two speakers have thoughts on this, because I think long term it is part of our future. Essential oils. Yeah, now I'm not going to get into the debate around harvesting microbial protein. That's a whole nother story. But there are certainly good reports out there with different essential oils that have got a positive effect on reducing protein in diets. You know, and other spin-off benefits by being able to do that, such as improved fertility, better milk quality, lower milk ureas. So I spotted this quote, you know, a few weeks ago, and it sort of really brought certain bits of this presentation home to me. So I want to just take a minute to look at it. And social media makes a complicated subject really simple. And I think answering this question, we're possibly trying to make a really complicated subject and give it a simple answer that we just remove soya or we reduce soya. We're certainly not seeing it in conventional, you know, and I think we have to be very careful of removing it, you know, certainly from the organic sector. And we have to take into account, you know, all the bits and pieces of the chain. So how does removing soya affect the farmers and the smallholders? You know, we also have to remember that, and going back to your point at the beginning, Jerry, is soya expeller fed to livestock a byproduct, or is it a product in its own right? The demand is driven for me by oil. And so for me, soya expeller, we are part of the whole chain, and it is a byproduct for me. But we've also got to take into account by removing it, what it does, removing essential amino acids. The pig and poultry industry, or certainly poultry, not my skill set, but I know that diets are formulated on lysine and methionine. Where do we replace that from in terms of how does it affect animal performance and animal welfare? So time for some answers. Is it possible to replace soya expeller? Definitely, yes. But, and there's always a but, who influences the answer? Farmers, for sure. They definitely have a choice whether it goes into the diets or doesn't. The supply chain, the shippers, the traders, they need to guarantee that supplies are from sustainable, ethical sources. The certifiers definitely have got a part to play in this. You know, we need more data, we need acreages, we need new conversions that are coming in there so that we can link livestock farmers with arable growers, and I think that is certainly part of the solution going forward. The compounders, the processors, the seed producers. The seed producers need the data from the certifiers. The compounders need the shippers and the traders to do their bit. The processors need to ensure that milk and meat and prices actually is a fair price throughout the chain. And the consumer is the one who drives the change. But we have to see a change in mindset so that we move away from being a price-driven consumer to being, quality and an ethical-driven consumer. So to conclude it all, whose issue is it? Is it a supply chain or is it a farmer issue? It's all our issues, in my opinion. So to summarize and to finish off, one thing I think we have to be careful what we wish for is just remember, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, very relevant last point. Let's have a sensible conversation on this. Rob, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, coming back the other way, because obviously your the work that you've done previously, previous employer, and you know your work. One of the issues being challenged within the conventional world is that the mills won't buy the peas and beans because they have to be processed. So there's no demand. So the price isn't sufficient to make it worth farmers growing it. So they don't grow it, and then there's not enough quantity to make the mills do it. Is there a step there that we can work on? Is there a position that we need to take?
I think there are probably two steps. I think one of the steps is actually linking livestock producers with arable producers and linking them over a period of time, rather than what can we buy, what's the cheapest, can we actually work together? And as you know, Jerry, I do quite a bit of work in Denmark, and I see a lot of this collaboration between arable and livestock units in Denmark, and I know they've got better geography than us, and we've certainly got the arable eastern part of the country and the southwest or the northwest livestock areas. But I think there's that collaboration, and I think from a milling point of view, I think the processing is easy to overcome. I think it's the volume. What's the real key issue? As all mills have got limited bins, and if a half full bin is a half empty use of space, so I think the challenge is getting enough volume that you've got them week in, week out. So when formulations are pulled together, they're consistent.
Right. Yeah. And we know that soybean meal, when it comes in, is a ready-milled product. So it doesn't need processing, doesn't need touching, it just comes straight in on the boat.
But it still has to, it's still got to run through the grinder, same as every other product that's going in there. Wheat comes in whole, peas come in from Eastern Europe whole. So most things run through the grinder. The only issue is if you want to put it into blends, you've got to process it first. But I don't see the processing argument as the biggest detriment. I think consistent supply is a bigger issue, so that if you need 200 tons a month, you need 2,400 for the year. Yeah. And if that's what you put in as your percentage, you need to be able to get it on a weekly basis.
Yep. There was a question raised about your figures about pulses. I've had a quick scan through the websites and I can't find any numbers precisely, so about your acreages and the hectareages. But
yeah.
So I've had a quick look but couldn't find the answers. But we'll move on. Following on from that, Sam Lee Gamage from John Lewis Partnership. Sam's got this amazing title of Partner and Ethics and Sustainability Manager, brackets raw material sourcing, brackets food. So Sam, explain all that, and here you go.
It's a bit of a mouthful. I need to find a way to do a shorthand for that. But in short, yeah, I work for the John Lewis Partnership. We're the biggest employee-owned organisation in the world, not in the world, in the UK, probably Europe as well, I think. Within that, I sit within the ethics and sustainability team. We're a really big team. We cover kind of agriculture and responsible sourcing, but also things like our climate change commitments, circular economy, and our kind of charitable giving and so on. So there's actually a lot of us, 50 of us in this team. So the business takes our ethical responsibilities and our sustainable responsibilities really seriously. So the team I sit in focuses on our supply chains and making sure that our products are sourced sustainably. And my role specifically focus on our feed products. So I spend a lot of time working with commercial teams in Waitrose on sourcing our products, and working with our kind of Waitrose farming partnership groups and suppliers as well, speaking to them about how our products are made and what goes in them. And I manage all of the due diligence and reporting and everything to do with that. In particular, for me, the highest priority things that I work on are forest risk commodities. So things in our products that could be associated with deforestation, and making sure that we have a plan to address that and source our those key commodities sustainably. So that includes palm oil, soya, and cocoa. We also work on ethical trade, so things like tea, cocoa, coffee, sugar, things like that, bananas, and so forth as well. So quite a broad remit, but a very important part of it is working with our farming partners and supply chains on feed, because feed is critically important part of the total footprint of our meat, our dairy, and our fish products as well. And so if you can address feed, you're 2/3 of the way there, basically, in terms of managing the environmental footprint. So it's really, really important to us. Okay, so I've got some notes, but so yeah, and so soya in particular. So within feed, soya in particular is the most important ingredient. It's our most significant forest risk ingredient. So we have about 58,000 tons a year as our total footprint, and 99% of that comes from animal feed, and to about 20% of that is organic. And for us, we have commitments on net zero agriculture in our UK supply chain, and soy is crucial to that. We know that our customers, and we know that our partners, the partners who work for the business, really care about climate change. They care about deforestation. They care about biodiversity loss, and so yeah, soy is the crux for all of those things. So just to emphasise that that's really important. Rob mentioned earlier the UK Soy Manifesto. So alongside all other major UK retailers, many very big food service companies, and processors and manufacturers and so forth, we've signed up to the UK Soy Manifesto, and that commits us to a target of removing deforestation from the soya in our supply chain. So sourcing soya that is free from deforestation and conversion of highly biodiverse and carbon-rich ecosystems like the Cerrado or other ecosystems in South America in particular. So we're committed to that, as are other retailers. That's the kind of broad consensus in the industry in the UK. And so the challenge really is, how do we achieve that? We also, as a business, we have for a long time monitored and reported on our soy footprint and our soy sourcing, and transparency is really important part, and played a big role in kind of industry groups as well. So there's the Retail Soy Group, there's the UK Roundtable on Sustainable Soy, there's the Cerrado SOS Group, and so forth, and now the UK Manifesto as well. We recognise that these sustainability challenges are common across the whole industry, and we have to, if we're going to solve them, we have to work together, and we have to coordinate on our activities and what we're asking and our plans, so that we can, and that's going to be the most efficient, the most impactful, and ultimately the most cost-effective way to do it as well. So that's our approach. So when it comes to sourcing deforestation and conversion-free soya, I think it's important to give a kind of retailer perspective on this. So we, as a business, we're committed to doing it, but it's also really important to our customers. And as a business, at the end of the supply chain, we need to be able to communicate to our customers and to our stakeholders, whether that's NGOs, whether that's government as part of due diligence legislation and so forth, the way we are sourcing. And we also really need to be able to back that up. It's important that we have we can prove it. You know, we put these every year, we report on our footprint and our standards, and we make that information public, and you know, and that might become statutory as well. And so we not only do we need to do that, but we also need to make sure that all the evidence is in place for us to be able to say we can prove this to anyone who asks to the organisations that assure us, and so forth. So supply chain data is really, really important, and that's one of the biggest challenges from a retailer who's at the far end of the supply chain, is having all of that, collecting and having all information so we can make clear claims to our customers and our stakeholders. So that for soy and sourcing sustainability, that's a big part of it. And why is that important? Part of it is that, you know, the risk associated with soya varies quite a lot geographically, is one aspect of it. So obviously the highest risk for soya in terms of deforestation and land clearance is in South America, and in particular regions of South America like the Gran Chaco and the Cerrado and the legal Amazon, less so, but and now increasingly in other places like Bolivia as well. So that traceability back to origin is really, really important to understand risk and to be able to communicate risk and to be able to prioritize as well. So for us, that's really important. That traceability and transparency is our highest priority over everything, because that gives us the information we need to take action. And then beyond that, you know, it's really important, if we're going to, on our pathway to deforestation and conversion-free soil, we know that, you know, we need to work together as an industry to achieve that. But you have two broad categories of things you can do. One is to source soya sustainably, and the other is to substitute soya, as a lot of the discussion today is focused on. And you know, I spend a lot of time working with all sorts of different protein supply chains, from ruminants to monogastrics to agriculture supply chains, and every supply chain and the structure of every supply chain, and indeed organic supply chains versus non-organic, is very, very different. So in every individual sector and every supply chain, the solution is going to be slightly different, or the best option is going to be slightly different. And so that's the kind of approach we're taking, is we know what the goal is and we know when we need to get there, but we're going to have to, on a kind of case-by-case basis with our supply chains, work out what's the best way to do this. And is it best to do it individually in that supply chain, or is it best to do it collectively as an industry? And I also want to be clear that, you know, I personally and us as a business, we're not anti-soy per se. You know, as a crop, soy is a brilliant crop. It's very useful. It's very productive. You know, it's going to continue being used across the world in agriculture at large. So for me, the absolute top priority is to make sure that where soy is grown and when it's grown sustainably, and rather than expanding onto more land to increase production, there's more. Actually, yeah, might seem like a dirty word in this conversation, but intensification, or at least increasing productivity rather than expanding the land footprint. And so and then using, you know, our demand and aggregating our demand with other retailers and other businesses to help send that signal and drive that change in the wider industry. We can't do that alone, but that's one of the things we do to contribute to, and, you know, to demand that in our own supply chains is one of the things we do. But also, it's also important that there are opportunities to substitute soya as well. And so where that can reduce total aggregate demand for soya globally, or it can reduce, you know, demand for land in, you know, very sensitive regions like the Cerrado, then that is also a really good thing. But the key is, you know, identifying where that's the case and where it can really have a significant beneficial impact. And there are opportunities really for innovation and research and development to help achieve that. And so we're very supportive of that, and we're involved in our supply chains in a number of projects focused on, you know, different innovative feed ingredients that could be used as alternative proteins. And you know, Rob's already mentioned some of these, and I'll talk about those in a second. So for me, where soy removal or substitution makes sense is we need to make sure, first of all, that animal welfare is maintained. For us as a business, that's an absolute top priority, and it's really important to our customers as well. So, you know, understanding the impact of, you know, nutritional changes on the animals in our supply chains is a real priority for us. And it also needs to be technically and commercially viable. And that is a lot. a huge part of the challenge. So, you know, productivity, if there are productivity impacts, those impacts do have a real cost, and that can be a challenge. But and productivity impacts can have costs not just financially, but also in terms of environmental impacts as well. Less efficient production can increase impacts, and sometimes that is definitely worth it, and sometimes it isn't. But we need to think about everything in the whole to understand those different impacts, and where there is an impact, but there's a big environmental benefit, we need to be able to communicate that. We need to have the evidence to be able to communicate that confidently, to communicate the value, the benefit of doing things in a certain way, so that the customer, Rob mentioned, make the customer, people do need to pay for higher quality, more sustainable products. It's important that that happens for everyone in the supply chain to benefit from, to have value realized from doing the right thing. And so communicate is really important. And finally, the evidence the evidence piece is important about, is this net beneficial for the environment, not just on a specific farm, whether that farm's environmental impact is lower, but is this net beneficial for the world? Is this reducing global demand for land? Is this reduced? And so that is important to understand the total environmental benefit of different interventions that can be made, or different uses of feed. So so we've done, part of this is, a lot of this is still being worked out. There's a lot of innovation going on. It's quite exciting. There's all sorts of different potential opportunities to do this, and we're very supportive of that. In the past, we've worked with our ruminant supply chains on kind of sustainable forage protein, so introducing high protein forage seed mixes to reduce the need for soy and other proteins, and that was successful, and was part of a kind of collaboration with universities to be able to document the reduced need for protein inputs, the reduced cost, and the environmental benefits of that. So that was a great project. In some of our supply chains, they've reduced soy very significantly through using rape and other options that Rob mentioned, but also in some supply chains, synthetic amino acids. I know that I'm not pretty sure for organic that might not be an option, but reducing total protein that way in those supply chains is, and that's a good thing, because there's a net decrease in demand for land and other environmental impacts just because you're balancing out those amino acids. And we have projects on algae and on other single-cell organisms, a range of different single-celled organisms, and on insects as well in our supply chains as well. I agree that the way I view those, as they are, the trial results I've seen on insects, is that nutritionally and technically they work, though there's still more research to be done on those. Obviously, the cost is extremely high currently. You're talking more than 10x, maybe. They're for on a like-for-like basis in terms of protein, and that will need to come down really for them to be scaled to a significant enough level to have a really big impact on soy imports and things like that. But I kind of view them a bit like wind turbines were 20 years ago, where it's an important technology that has a lot of potential, and how do we get these things down the cost curve so they can get to a big enough scale to really make a difference. So yeah, that's our view. I think the focus of this discussion is really interesting, exciting. It's one of the potential ways that we can find alternatives and reduce total impact. But I would also say that it's really important that we do the research and the monitoring and evaluation to really understand the benefits, and to be able to communicate those benefits as well to customers and other people.
Thanks, Sam. That's a really good example of the way we can use metrics, we can use the stuff, and let's move ourselves forward and accept. And I like the point you made, that let's accept that if you have a higher welfare or a higher environmental benefit from a product, then the money has to come to the people doing the work as well, and not just being lost through the supply chain, which is not criticizing directly the supply chain, but there's so many middlemen sometimes in this, that if we're doing the work to improve the environment, we've got to get a benefit. I know this, we argue that as organic producers all the time, that we're doing this, and we're getting paid for production. We're not getting we're often getting paid cost of production, even though it looks like a massive premium. So we need to acknowledge that. Okay, I'm going to move on, handing it over to Mike Mallett. Mike is a I got to know Mike a couple of years ago through a project that I was running called the OKNet EcoFeed project, which was looking at alternatives to soya for pigs and poultry production in Europe. We went out to Europe in a couple of meetings, been to his farm to look at the system he's been setting up. And it's a really good example of the way that if you have a mind to do this, you can move to a soya-free chicken farming system. That's all I'm going to say. Leave it on to Mike now to talk him through. So any further questions, please put them on the chat and we'll pick up on some other questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Hello there. Good evening, everyone. Just checking you can see my screen there. Fine, great stuff. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mallett. I'm the manager at Maple Farm Calsale. Maple Farm is located in Suffolk, near the coast. 350 acres, all organic, mostly arable, along with a 3,000 hen layer operation, producing the Maple Farm brand eggs. We also produce fruit and vegetables, have a farm shop and a flour mill thrown in for good measure. My slide's not changing. Bear with me a second. What's going on here? Okay, here we go. I'll do it there. Okay, now I started at Maple Farm 9 years ago, and running a layer operation was totally new to me. My background is more fruit and veg. As I said in the introduction, the farm has a flour mill, and the layer operation had been started sometime before my arrival as a way of utilizing the middlings and the bran from the flour mill as feed. The farm produced its own feed using this mill waste, along with grain and peas grown on the farm and supplemented with bought-in protein feeds. We have a registered feed mill, and these days have a roller, hammer and a plate mill to get everything to the hen's liking. When I started, in my naivety, I thought it was normal for poultry producers to mill and mix their own feed, not really realizing for some time that we were very much the exception to the norm, and most egg producers just bought in their feed. One of the protein products I had to buy was organic soya expeller that originated from China or India. This immediately made me ask, why are we bringing soya halfway around the world to feed British hens? How can this be sustainable for an organic farm? Why can't we feed hens with a UK source diet? Those questions I've been working on ever since. So why is the issue with soya such a difficult problem to overcome? Now, I must clarify that I'm looking at this from the perspective of organic egg production and not meat production. Modern egg layers have been bred over the last 100 years or so that we now have hens that will produce over 300 eggs a year. They weigh around 2 kilograms and eat around 130 grams of feed per day. They are amongst the most productive livestock we have. Between the ages of 25 and 40 weeks, when a hen is in peak production, if she lays around 6 eggs a week, she is converting about 20% of her own body weight into those eggs each week. That's an extraordinary amount of nutrients being taken out of the hen that needs replacing. The modern hen will start laying at about 20 to 21 weeks and will lay in earnest. It is what they've been bred to do. They will lay eggs daily, even if the feed does not have the nutrient levels required to match that being lost through the egg production. The hen eventually starts drawing on her own body reserves, losing condition, which is really not fair on the hen. So to meet the needs of the hen, we normally require a layered diet at peak lay in the region of 17.5 to 18% crude protein, with the methionine levels somewhere around 3 grams per kilogram. In the UK, organic wheat usually makes up the bulk of this feed, typically around between 30 and 50% of the total. The protein level of organic wheat ranges between 9 and 12%, So we need to add other ingredients, much higher in protein and with different amino acids to raise the protein level up to the near 18% required. Organic soya expeller at typically 44% crude protein make this relatively easy to do. One problem is all the other protein crops we can grow in Europe have a lower protein levels than soya. The best is sunflower seed cake at around 30%. Lupin seeds have around 30% crude protein. Field beans or fava beans are typically around 26, and peas are around 21. As we can see from this slide, here, the amino acid ratios are remarkably similar across a range of legume crops. The top line on this graph is soya. The crops below are field beans and vetch. So the ratio of the amino acids is similar, just lower in volume in the commonly grown UK crops. Why is that a problem? Well, for starters, if field beans are 26% and soya is 44% protein, I would need to use 1.7 times the quantity of field beans over the amount of soya used to match the soya nutrient level. Using that volume of beans is impractical because then it throws the diet out of balance in terms of energy and carbohydrate. And also the field beans have tannins and anti-nutritional factors. That means without treatment, they cannot be included at the levels required to equal soya. Don't get me wrong, we need to grow more pulses in the UK and use them in our feed. It's just that I don't see how they can be a direct and total soya requirement. We need another high protein source. Raw soybeans are not perfect by any means either. Soya has many of the anti-nutritional factors seen in other beans and pulses. The soya cake or expeller that is fed to livestock being the product of soya oil extraction through pressing or extrusion, processes that heats the beans to a level where most of these anti-nutritional factors are destroyed. So I thought, well, what did we use before soya? Soya has only been used as a principal protein source in animal feed since the 1970s after all. This next slide shows a page from the 1950 Farmer and Stock Breeders Yearbook, and this page gives the recommended poultry rations. The principal protein ingredients are pea or bean meal and brewer's grains, but the ingredients with the highest protein content is fish meal and meat and bone meal. The fish meal is included at 10% of the ration, which you would think would taint the flavour of the eggs. In the 1950s, the UK fishing industry was much larger than it is today, and fish meal was relatively cheap. By the late 1960s, the fishing industry was in serious decline, and as the fish stocks were overexploited. The use of fish meal and meat and bone meal was also stopped in ruminant feeds after BSE disease outbreaks, leaving shipped-in soya to become the protein of choice. Now, 50 years on, the world's ever-increasing desire for soy protein means in South America, they are tearing down rainforests to create more space for more crop production. How mad is that? And all in the pursuit of cheap protein. Now, we grow vetch as a green manure. And for us, it has become the best and most consistent nitrogen-fixing legume to grow. It also yields well when we harvest the seed, not as good as field beans, but better and more consistent than peas, and fixes far more nitrogen than peas and beans for the following crop. It is also excellent when grown as a mixed crop or intercrop, especially with oats. Of course, this led me to think whether we could use the vetch seeds as a protein feed for poultry. As we saw on the earlier slide, vetch has a similar amino acid profile and crude protein level at 26% to field beans. However, it's not that simple. It has all the tannins and trypsin inhibitor activity of beans, but with an added toxin, Y-glutamyl B-cyanoalanine, to contend with. Y-glutamyl B-cyanoalanine inhibits the uptake of methionine, which regulates the frequency of egg layer and size. In 2018, I became involved in the OKNet EcoFeed project, which is a chance to test whether germination of sprouting could reduce the toxins within the vetch to the point where it could be safely used as a poultry feed. Germination had the benefit for me that in the resulting sprouted grains could be used as a forage, especially in winter, or when the birds are housed because of bird flu restrictions. I also like the idea of sprouting because it's a process that can be done on farm and without the cost of heating or roasting equipment and the associated running costs of such equipment. By the end of the EcoFeed project, we had evolved from sprouting on trays to sprouting in this experimental drum sprouter. This produces a high quality sprouted grain and showed us a system that is scalable and could be partially automated. Once sprouted, the vetch becomes far more palatable to the birds. This slide shows a bunch of birds mobbing a tray of sprouted vetch laid on the ground. When we were experimentally feeding the birds with sprouted grain during the trial, although we were able to test for tannins and trypsin inhibitor activity with the commercial lab we were using, we could not test for the glutamyl B-cyanoalanine to see what effect it had on that toxin. So this needs further research. So if there is a student in the audience looking for a research project, please contact me afterwards, as I still believe there is a good potential for the use of vetch as a protein source in monogastrics. I've just taken it as far as I can on farm and now need help to take the project further. But exploiting these homegrown legumes still doesn't give me that high protein source I need for a balanced diet. About a year ago, a chance conversation with a friend sparked the idea of using insect protein, which brings us full circle back to our flour mill, the waste bran and middlings from the mill being the perfect feedstock for mealworms. So last December, we started a mealworm farm to raise live mealworms to be fed to the birds. Starting with just 3 kilograms of mealworms, we now have bred them to the point where we have hundreds of trays in this facility. Mealworms, the larvae of the darkling beetle, mealworms, the larvae of the darkling beetle are rich in protein and fat. This is no quick fix. It's taken almost 12 months to breed up enough stock to be useful, and we are still learning the best way to do this. I chose mealworms, but the other common insect being used is the black soldier fly. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. I think in the end, black soldier fly production will be the route to bulk insect mealworm production. Sorry, bulk insect meal production, but it is a wet, smelly business compared with mealworm production, which is a dry and technically simpler but slower process. Mealworms aren't just good for the hens. We love the integrated approach it gives us in that for every kilogram of mealworms raised, 2 kilograms of their fast is produced. This insect waste is easy to handle, easy to store, dry powder. That is perfect natural fertilizer for feeding the soil in the horticultural unit, and is proving an absolute game changer in the quantity and quality of fruit and vegetables being produced. So the situation now is that I'm working on 3 elements that will allow us to be fully soya free. The first element will be using a hen that best suits the system. For me, the ultimate bird is a bird that weighs about 2.5 kilos, eats about 140 grams of feed per day, and thrives with a protein level of about 16%, and still lays in the region of about 260 eggs a year. I cannot help but feel we have with layers created this vicious cycle where we have hens pre-programmed to lay so many eggs that we have no choice but to feed them a high protein diet. What would happen if we de-stress the system and use the hens that we knew would lay fewer eggs from the outset, but thrive on lower protein feed? To achieve this, we have been using more dual-purpose breeds, or as I call them, heritage hybrids. Birds such as the BBF, a cross between a Rhode Island Red and a Meringue Cuckoo, and the Black Rock, which is a Rhode Island Red barred Plymouth Rock cross. The Black Rocks are lighter than my ideal, but the hardiest birds we have and the most phenomenal foragers. The second component is utilizing farm-grown proteins in the form of the beans and peas and vetch that we've spoken about already. Including these in the crops in the rotation not only helps the hens, but helps the farm generally in terms of nitrogen fixing and soil health improvements. We are still looking into ways if we can reduce the toxins in vetch and beans, and are about to start trials by heat treating them by extrusion to make them more useful. The third component is the use of insect proteins. We continue to grow and expand the insect farm. This is a truly closed loop source of feed, making full use of the grains we grow. So slowly we are weaning ourselves off soya as these elements come together. Some have taken years to get right. If all goes to plan, late spring next year, we will not only be soya free, but also the feed will all be regionally produced. In fact, the bulk will be farm produced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That's ideal. Lucy has put a link up onto the chat line about one of the trials we ran as part of the Oaken EcoFeed project. There's also another one which we'll find, and that you can look at the either Innovative Farmers website, because the trials are all on there, or the videos are there. There's also a second trial on using the sprouted seeds, looking at the results and the outcomes of that, and also another one on heat treating of beans, because as Mike commented, has been commented before, the anti-nutritional factors are one of the reasons which reduces the amount we can use. If we heat up the bean, just by putting it through a toaster, we can actually destroy a lot of those anti-nutritional factors, which means we can actually increase inclusion rates. And actually there is a company in Lincolnshire apparently who makes a heater. I've got details if you want to talk to them. So fascinating directions of travel we can go. So we've had a range of questions coming through here. So I'm going to pick up one of them. I think, actually, I will just pick up a little bit of that from Sam. The question to you about global demand for land is a limiting factor, and perhaps also leading into how can we produce more products in the UK. So question then I'm leading on to Rob, from your experiences, how can farmers move in that direction? And Mike, again, as a farmer's point of view. So I know you've answered it, but you just want to sort of cover it a little bit wider, Sam.
Yeah, of course. So that the kind of global demand for land piece is really related to the deforestation piece as well. So ultimately, that is what's driving agricultural frontiers, or one of the major factors at the kind of biggest macro sense. And so, and any individual micro decision contributes minimally to that. But the question I have in my head is, what if everyone did it? And then would that be the right solution? And ultimately, and that's not realistic either. Ultimately, there's going to be a mixture of different solutions in different contexts, and that hopefully overall will mean that we have sustainable food systems and address deforestation. So what I'm trying to say is that global demand for land does matter, particularly if we're talking about solutions at a kind of large scale. Like, will this, if we do this, you know, at the whole sector level, is this going to be net beneficial or not? It matters, but at the same time, it's not the only important thing. And particularly, in organic, most of organic production, it's already been said today, is not from South America. It's not from high deforestation risk regions, and so it's less of a factor in organic in that sense, the kind of global demand for land. And we can see from Mike's presentation that there's other factors that are important, like kind of integrated farming systems and the benefits that can come with that, and kind of more local benefits in terms of farming systems as well. I know that it's something that organic, that sort of association are very interested in as well, in terms of how this can fit into rotation. So it's the main thing is that when we often, as a retailer, you have to think at scale, and we think the way me and the people in my team operate is thinking about, okay, how do we create a strategy and a policy across our supply base that's going to work at scale, and in that sense we are quite cautious to make sure that when we make a change or substitution, we want to make sure that we understand the kind of different potential implications of that in all different dimensions, whether that's commercial or environmental, and make sure that when we do that, there's a net beneficial impact in terms of our goals. And so there's always going to be trade-offs in different components of sustainability, whether that's it's just making sure you understand what those are when you're making the decision, and then moving forwards as you think best.
That's great.
Yeah.
Mike, any comments to make? And equally on the question about, John had a question during this about how can he as a grass-based farmer increase his productivity or feed his chickens and his poultry?
Well, just comments about the land use first of all. I mean, the thing about we're talking about organic from my perspective here. I mean, obviously in the UK, our organic area is very low compared with the rest of Europe, and things would be so much easier if there was actually far more organic farmers actually producing far more pulses as part of the rotation. I think even though conventional farmers are now looking, many of them looking to use more regenerative techniques, and especially with the price of fertilizer going where it's gone to, the need to actually grow more nitrogen fixing crop, grow more pulses, we could actually overcome a lot of our supply issues by actually growing more. Replacing soy is extremely difficult because it is just such, you know, we just import so much of it, and trying to grow that in the UK is almost impossible. But we can make a contribution. We can go a lot more way, and I think having better rotations would help that enormously. And as for John and the changing his or compiling his own poultry ration, I need to know a lot more from John about how much he actually, whether he makes his own food now, and a lot depends on how big his operation is. I mean, I'm quite lucky in that the layer hen operation is kind of matched to the size of the farm, and if the land was smaller, we wouldn't be able to produce what we do. If the hens were larger in numbers, again, we'd be out of balance. We wouldn't be able to kind of grow the amount of food we do. So it's a question of having balance in the system, and perhaps that's where, you know, kind of more farming needs to be.
That's great. So, Rob, your experience of working with farmers, what can we do to get more pulses being produced in the ration so that you can have it as a food source? What pressures have we got to apply, and what have we got to do as farmers? Because as you said, farmers are part of this issue, supply chain is part of this issue. Mute. You're on mute, Rob.
Sometimes you get a little bit of feedback from my office. I don't quite know why, so I just put it on to mute so that I don't upset everyone else. But I agree both with Sam and with Mike. You know, it's about the volume and it's about the scale, and how do we scale it up within the UK. I think for me the key is to probably stick to what we're good at and stick to the crops that we can grow. But I think there's an element of collaboration that's got to come into this. It's that fair supply right the way through the chain, from the grower to whether he's a pig, poultry, beef or dairy producer, so that passes along down the chain. And I think working together, you know, can you grow me, you know, 100 tons, 50 tons, 150 tons of beans or peas, you know, and I will work with you, and I will work with you over a period. And I think, you know, some of the, again, as I touched on in the presentation, some of that help's got to come from you guys, Jerry, at the certifiers, so that we actually can see that data. We can see that there are, you know, there's 1,000 hectares, or there's 1,500, or there's 50, but that's what we see is in conversion. So we can start and build and plan and pull things in and pull people together. I think that, for me, collaboration within the UK, but stick to the crops that we know that we can grow, and we can grow with reasonable success. And when I say reasonable success, you know, my grandfather always described pulses, or beans in particular, as a wishing crop. And what he would say, he'd either wish he'd planted the whole farm, or he wish he'd never seen them.
Yeah.
And we have to take into account that, you know, we can have yields of 5 ton a hectare, and it can be a ton a hectare. So you've always got that to take into account as well. So for me, the key is collaboration and working together.
Can I also highlight another point that came out from the OCONET EcoFeed project, and actually there's also a European data research site called farmknowledge.eu, which is always worth looking at as well for a lot of this stuff. But one of the big frustrations we've had is that there's just very little research being done on non-soya based production systems, particularly with pigs and poultry. And it's almost as though, we asked as part of the project, what would happen if soya supply was reduced by 30%? And just because it just wasn't available. And it was fascinating how there was a bit of a wriggling around trying to find an answer that they thought was acceptable, but effectively they didn't really have an answer to that question on the conventional poultry producers, simply because they just hadn't worked around in that area. And so we need more research. As organic farmers, we're supported to go organic, but all the rationing is based around conventional farming systems and not around ones that, and Mike's using grass as part of his ration. And there's research projects, part of the EcoFeed project, on using nettles as a protein source because it's high in methionine. It's a massive area that work could be done. Anne had a question about breeds, but I think Mike's picked that one up. It's effectively those breeds that we're currently using. I think that links back to that point I've just been made. Maybe are not suited to the farming systems that we need to move towards, and we have to adapt and change those farming systems to some extent. We've got a very philosophical discussion going on here as well about whether the way the output is produced is more important than who controls production. So that's equally as part of the factor here is where who dominates and controls the supply chain and the social justice issues. So that's equally a very important part of what Sam's been saying, is that we've got to get the whole balance right on these things. So Rob, can I ask you another question in terms of more technical again, because one of the questions we've had, soya gets used as the basic of all protein source for all rations, almost way right through. And I know you don't do you don't do pig and poultry rationing so much, but is part of the problem we've just got so used to using soya. And at times when you don't need the growth, you don't need that production, we're still using it because it's easy. And I think Mike perhaps might have some thoughts on this as well.
It is a difficult question to answer. And it's not just a straightforward, yes, we've got used to using it, no, we haven't. And I think Mike touched on it in his presentation, it's how we fit certain proteins into the diet and how we replace that volume of protein. And that for me is the real key. It's how you get the other raw materials in, how we get cereals in there, how we get more forage in there. So it's not just a use of it, it's part and parcel, and it's far more than just a percentage protein. It's the type of protein. It's, as Sam touched on, it's the amino acids, what are in there, what it provides as well. So for me, it's not just we've got used to it. It is, it is an essential part, certainly of organic diets for lots of the reasons just mentioned. I don't know whether you want to add to that, Mike.
Over the years, several people have said to me, "Oh, you don't want to mess about with changing soya. I mean, it's so cheap to ship it from China. The most expensive part of the whole route is the lorry from the dock to the mill." And what we've seen in the last few months is the actual fragility of that supply chain, and that the shipping costs have now gone absolutely through the roof to actually get it here in the first place. And of course, again, we're talking organic soya, but most of that comes from China and India, which are very populous countries. And there's always the risk that their actually internal consumption could actually almost dry up the supply chain. And then, so I think we can't rely on soya forever. And I think possibly in the same way that fish meal was something that was used for decades and then suddenly stopped. I can see a point where soya could go similar way, and we actually need to look at an alternative and produce more things at home and be more sustainable.
Okay.
I think just to pick up on that, and I agree with the supply chain side of things, and actually if you you look at the cost of, soya this winter, we've almost removed soya from a lot of diets, certainly ruminant diets by default, because it's been priced out. What really remains to be seen is how, for me, how the animals come through the winter, how the cows come through the winter. Do we manage to get them back in calf? Do we get the production that we're looking for? And I know Sam touched on it in his presentation earlier, that, should we be looking to produce more from less as such, So we will see this winter just what effect soya probably has on ruminant diets. And, can we just replace it with rape? Can we just replace it with sunflowers? Definitely not.
That's great. Thank you. So,
yeah, I was just going to say that in my experience working with our supply chains, that soy can be reduced quite a lot. It's most important in the kind of young stock or weaning stages, at least in monogastrics, but after that it can be substituted for other things in kind of finisher diets. For pork, it's not used for us, and not necessary, but that is conventional, so it's probably using potentially ingredients that organic producers can't. So it's a different context, but there is a large scope to reduce it from a technical basis. In our dairy herd hasn't used soy in its feed rations, our conventional dairy, actually, for since 2016, and my understanding is that there is some impact to that in terms of productivity, but not in terms of quality, and not huge. So it from a technical perspective, it can be done. That just the question is, how scalable is that really at an industry level? And I think there's some question mark around that. And
okay, that's great. So we're coming close to the end. If we haven't got any more questions, the team at NRFC actually worked very hard, and I don't want to keep them dragging longer. And I've been instructed that we're not allowed to go past past anyway, at pain of death. So I want to thank initially Helena for sitting in and helping us set things up here in the first place. Mike, Sam, and Rob, have you got any other final comments you want to make just to sort of wrap up before we sort of turn off and we'll go off and do something else for the rest of the evening?
The main point I'd like to make is, I think what Mike is doing is really inspiring. We need a lot of work on innovation in feed to find different ways to reduce impact, and I think it's fantastic. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear about that. I hope there's more coming, and also, yeah, let's get all the evidence so that we can prove the benefits and scale it and tell customers all about it, and so everyone can benefit.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would like to second that. I've learned a lot from listening to what Mike had to say tonight, and it's given me another couple of trains of thought.
That's brilliant. Okay, and Mike?
That's good to hear. That's good to hear that. Thank you, guys. Yeah, all I can say is I'm just going to keep pursuing on. And as I say, if anybody wants to help me with the vetch project, then please let me know. And yeah, I'm sure I shall pop up another conference fairly soon, saying that I've actually achieved what I'm setting out to do. It's been a long time coming. So.
That's brilliant. Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody else for attending. It's absolutely brilliant that you made the effort to sit in and listen to this. The recording will be available at some point or other, but if you want to talk to any of us as the speakers or directly, please get in touch. Thank you all much for coming. Have a good rest of the evening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.